Hello everyone, welcome to English Literature with Sumi. In today's video, we are going to discuss about the age of transition. First, let us discuss about the historical background that ranges from 1740 to 1800. Now, the historical background of the age of transition consists of three major characteristics, or you can say features. Firstly, the decline of party feud, imperial expansion, and then the French Revolution. So let us discuss each of these characteristics separately. Firstly, the decline of party feud. Now, we already know that there were two parties ruling. Firstly, the Whigs and secondly, the Tories. Now, during this transition period, the contest between the Whigs and the Tories still continues, but it is hardly the previous bitter argument or the fight that we have seen in the early period. The chief reason for this change is said to be found in the weakness of the Tory party. So, this is how there was a decline in the party feud between the Whigs and the Tories. Next is the imperial expansion. By the word imperial, we clearly understand that it is about the British expansion or the colonial expansion as well. Now, during the 18th century, there was immense growth seen in the British Empire, in the wealth and the importance of the British Empire. And among this expansion, the possession of India and America was itself an inspiration. And when the new territories brought new burdens like that of the American Revolt and clash of ideals, this led to fresh literary effort, as can be easily seen in the words of Burke, that is Edmund Burke. Next we come to the French Revolution. So long before it was burst, that is the French Revolution, the storm of the revolution was already, in the words of Edmund Burke, blackening the horizon. Now, during this century, or you can say during this period of transition, new ideas were germinating, new forces were gathering strength. And the revolution, when it did come in 1789, the French Revolution took place in 1789, it was only the climax to a long and diffused unrest. So, on the particular date of 1789, it has reached its climax, but it was still going on before that period as well. Next we come to the general characteristics of the age. Please don't confuse between the characteristics of the historical background and the general characteristics of the age. Here age refers to the transition age or the age of transition or the transition period. So many characteristics are there. I will be discussing each one separately. You can just follow it. The first one of the general characteristics is the double tendency. Now, by the word double, I know it is clear that there is dual tendency or there is two tendencies going on. Firstly, the allegiance to the old order of classicism. This can be clearly seen in the works of Samuel Johnson, who is the chief and almost the only figure representing this order or this tendency. The second one is the search after the new order of Romanticism, which can be clearly seen in James Thomson's Seasons, published in 1730. So, these were the dual tendency that was going on. So, the new Romanticism was the next characteristics of the age. So, by the term New Romanticism, it was meant that the Romantic movement started much earlier before Wordsworth or Coleridge, and the New Romanticism during this period was characterized by a return to nature, then fresh interest in man's position of the world, then enlightened sympathy for the poor and the oppressed, then revolt against conventional literary technique, and fresh treatment of romantic themes. We will discuss later about the romantics of this period. Next characteristic is about the new learning. The middle and later stage of the 18th century, it showed a minor renaissance that touched nearly all Europe. Now, about Renaissance, we all just remember one thing, that Renaissance is about the development both in technical, educational and other fields of literature. So, the increase in wealth and comfort, it coincided with a general uplifting of the standard of human intellect. So, both were increasing at the same time. The human intellect was also increasing, and the general wealth of the people were also increasing during this period. Next, we have the new philosophy. So, the spirit of new thinking and the interest for inquiry was there in this period also, and it received its consummate expression in the works of Voltaire, who was marked by keen skepticism, and the zest for eager inquiry in his work can be clearly seen. Then next we have the growth of historical research. Now the 18th century, along with the other developments, it witnessed the swift rise of historical literature to a place of great importance. So historical research was given a prominent place during the 18th century. Then we have the new realism. At first, as might be expected, the spirit of enquiry led to the suppression of romance, but gradually it drew within the circle of literary endeavor all the ranks of mankind. Thus, we have the astonishing development of the novel, which we will be discussing later, in the works of Fielding and his companions as well, can be clearly seen. Lastly, but not leastly, the decline of political writing. Now, this point is linked with the not double tendency, but the historical background or characteristic, that is the end of party feud, because if there is no feud between the two parties, or the feud has declined or has decreased in nature, so there will be no need of writing political pamphlets, and it was all over. With the partial decay of the party spirit, the activity in pamphleteering was over, and poets and satirists were no longer the favorites of kings and queens, because they do not need the pamphleteers or the poets to satire other parties' members. So, these were the general characteristics of the transition period. And if it comes that name some or write some characteristics of the transition period, you can write these points and you can just describe them in your own words, so that the examiner can give you directly the marks, because whenever there is a answer sheet in front of an examiner, then he likes it when you give it in point wise, because that makes his job easier. If you write it in paragraph, you may get less marks, because it's not possible for every teacher or examiner to read line by line, and if you give it in point wise, it becomes easier for them to see that you do have a knowledge of the whole idea. So that's a small tip from my side. Next we come to the reactionary school, which was spearheaded by Samuel Johnson. Now the dates I have not mentioned here, because you can easily get it in the net or you can search it in the internet. But I may mention it, that Samuel Johnson 1709 to 84. Okay, 1709 to 84. Now, why I am mentioning, or why is it so that the reactionary school was spearheaded by Samuel Johnson? In the previous slide, I do have mentioned that there was a double tendency going on during this period, and the first tendency was the allegiance to the old order of classicism. Now, this was why Samuel Johnson was regarded as the person or the poet belonging to the first tendency, because he was also a member, or not member exactly, but you can say that he also followed the classical ideals in his works. So one of the most important contribution of Samuel Johnson was his Dictionary of English Language, and this dictionary has given him a reputed position in the development of English language. I'll be making a separate video on Samuel Johnson's contribution to the English language, along with some other writers as well, like William Shakespeare also has a great contribution to the development of English language. So I'll be discussing that in my other series, that is development of English language. Now, Samuel Johnson as a poet. Now, he wrote little poetry, and none of it, though it has much merit, can be considered to be first class. His first ever poem was London, published in 1738. Then he has written The Vanity of Human Wishes, published in 1749. So these were of important merit, but it was not that much remarkable if we compare it with the other poets of this age. So Samuel Johnson as a dramatist now. Now when he first came to London in 1737, he brought with him a part of the play Irene, and it was a solemn, ponderous and undramatic blank verse tragedy, and it was not successful as well. But if we talk with his best friends, they also would admit that it was no success, and it then utterly disappeared because it was not successful and people do not like it. So it disappeared, taking with it Johnson's sole claim of becoming a dramatist. Now, Samuel Johnson as a prose writer, he is known as a prose writer because of one of his most famous contribution, as I have already mentioned, the Dictionary of the English Language, published in 1747. Now, Johnson claims to be called a first-rate writer, and this position rests partly on, not partly, but fully on his prose writings. His earliest work appeared in Caves, that is the Gentleman's Magazine, between the years 1738 to 1744. Then he began his work of the dictionary in 1747, and this was his greatest contribution to scholarship, and not only to scholarship but towards the development of English language as well. Now, while working on this project of the dictionary, he also wrote periodical essays for the Rambler. Then he wrote Rasselas Prince of Abyssinia in 1759, which was meant to be a philosophical novel, but it really turned out to be a number of Rambler essays strung together through the personality of an intruding young prince named Rasselas. And it's an interesting book though, I have read it, and if you want it, you can read it through. You won't be bored, but it's interesting according to me. And he also contributed to a series of papers under the title of The Idler to the Universal Chronicle. So besides his works, he also contributed a number of essays to other magazines as well. Then came Johnson's second truly great work. First truly great work was his Dictionary of English Language. Then second important contribution of his was his fine edition of Shakespeare, published in 1765. Then lastly, he wrote A Journey to the Western Islands of Scotland, published in 1775. This was a travel book, and it shows the faculty of narrative that he has and contains passages of great skill. So this was the works that Johnson has contributed during this period. Next we come to the transitional poets, or you can say the new romantics. So Thomson, he can be hardly called a great poet, yet in the history of literature, he is unusual enough to be regarded as a freak. So that's a comment given by one of the writers of a book of history of English literature. And as such, he is important, and it is necessary to give him some prominence because of his works. So, Thomson, his poetry includes The Seasons, published in 1730. It is a blank verse poem and consists of a long series of descriptive passages dealing with natural scenes. Of course, it will be of natural scenes only because the title itself is The Seasons. There he have described each of the seasons with natural scenes, and mainly those with which he was particularly familiar during his youth on the Scottish border. Then Thomson also wrote The Liberty 1735 to 36, which is a gigantic poem in blank verse, and it was intolerably dull. It had no success during that period. Then he wrote or published The Castle of Indolence, which is even more remarkable than The Seasons, but if you find in any of the books of history of English literature, you will see that The Seasons was given more prominence because of the skill that he has used in it. Then his dramas also includes of Sophonisba 1729 and Alfred 1740. Next up in the list of transitional poets, we have Oliver Goldsmith. Now his name is famous among the students of English literature, and his poetry includes The Traveller, published in 1764, and it deals with his wanderings through Europe. So it's also like a travel book. His next poem is The Deserted Village, published in 1770. Then his dramas include The Good-Natured Man and She Stoops to Conquer 1773, and Good-Natured Man was 1768. Then his prose include The Citizen of the World 1759 and The Vicar of Wakefield 1766. So these were the contributions that Goldsmith made during this period. Then we have Thomas Gray. Now let me say you one more thing, that Thomas Gray, William Collins, William Cooper, George Crabbe, and along with the other transitional poems, they were also named by a term that is precursors of Romanticism, because in their works we can see a very clear hint about the Romantic period. And if you have an idea about Wordsworth and Coleridge, you will say that yes, they are the precursors of, they were the successors of Gray, Collins, and along with other transitional poets. So Thomas Gray, his poetry includes Ode on a Distant Prospect of Eton College 1747, Elegy Written in a Country Churchyard 1751. Then he wrote Pindaric Odes 1757, and in his Pindaric Odes, The Bird and the Progress of Poetry are two of his Pindaric Odes in the book, and they certainly require some special mention because because they are quite remarkable for readers not familiar with history and literature. So apart from this, Thomas Gray also wrote letters about the visits or the scenes that he visited during his travels, and these letters show his vigor style and a sharp eye and a general admiration for the real beauties of nature. You can say that these letters showed his clear concept or his clear ideas about how to observe things. So the next poet of the transitional period was William Collins. He contributed very less during this period. Particular mention can be made of Percy Nicklock 1742 and Odes 1746. Just notice one thing, that during this period, odes, elegy, hymns were mostly written by the poets, because I have already told you that there was a dual tendency going on. There was a shift towards Romanticism also, and the poets could not completely forget about classicism also. So they had to write in a dual manner with a dual idea in their mind. Then next we have William Cooper. He also contributed less. His poetry includes Olney Hymns 1779, and his other collection of poems was named as Poems Only 1782. Then up next we have George Crabbe. His poetry includes The Library 1781. Then we have The Village 1783, The Borough 1810, and Tales 1812. So these were Crabbe's contribution during this period to the field of literature. So next we come to the new school. Now, in this we will be dealing with poets who wrote in the middle and later parts or years of the 18th century and who completely abandoned the classical tradition. So, in their generation, they came too early to be definitely included in the school of Wordsworth and Coleridge. So, they were the pre-romantics of the transition period. First, we have Robert Burns. His poetry includes poems 1786. He also contributed to the Scots Musical Museum and also to Thomson's select collection of original Scottish airs. So these were his contribution in this period, and his best work of Burns was almost entirely lyrical in nature or motive, we can say. And in his works we can see a range of emotions and experience as well. In Burns' work we can also find that his humor and pathos are as copious and varied as was his subject matter, as can be clearly seen in his works, that is poems, and also that his political and religious views have been given prominent in his works or by his admirers as well. So, Burns' style is noteworthy for the curious double tendency I have already told you that is typical of the transition. So, he was also a poet who have gradually started to move towards romanticism, but he has not completely forgotten the classicism. So, he was a poet of the transition. Then up next we have William Blake. Now, Blake, when we write about the romantics, we have in our mind Blake's poetry, but he is not romantic. He is a precursor of romanticism. So, we cannot actually consider him to be a romantic, but he was a precursor of romanticism. And his poetry include Poetical Sketches 1783. It was a series of imitative poems in which he experimented with various verse forms in the manner of Shakespeare. Then we have the Songs of Innocence. They were short lyrics embodying Blake's view of the original state of human society and the joy and happiness of children. The poems are also free from imitation of the earlier volumes that he wrote, and they particularly portrayed the innocence that was there in today's world or in his world, as we can say. Then the next book that he wrote was the Book of Thel 1790, which embodies much the same spirit of love and as his earlier works, and this was followed by his first series of revolutionary prophetic books, that is the French Revolution 1791. The French Revolution took place in 1789 and he wrote this book in 1791. Then we have the Visions of the Daughters of Albion. These were visionary books in 1793. Then he wrote America 1793. Then comes his Songs of Experience 1794, in which the mood of spontaneous love and happiness revealed in the Songs of Innocence was replaced by a less joyful note. In these lyrics, we see Blake presenting the two conflicting aspects of nature, which is so beautiful yet so cruel. So, we have a statement that nature is beautiful yet it is cruel. On the one hand, in the Songs of Innocence, my particular two favorite poems are, in the Songs of Innocence, we have the innocent lamb, white lamb that is, and in the Songs of Experience, we have the tiger. So, if you compare and contrast between these two books, that is Songs of Innocence and Songs of Experience, you will get two poems contrasting with each other. Like I have mentioned one, that is the lamb and the tiger. So this is how Blake has created his two works, Songs of Innocence and Experience. Then his visionary works came, that is the first book of Urizen 1794, then the Book of Ahania 1795, the Book of Laws 1795 and the Song of Laws 1795. So these were the works that William Blake contributed during the transition period. So this was the first part of the age of transition. In my next video or the next part of this video, I'll be discussing about the novelist of the transition period, then about the dramatist, then historians, then prose writers of this period, and I'll also be discussing about the development of literary forms during this period and the development of literary style. So that's all for today. Hope you liked the video, and if you are interested in English literature and if you want to understand English literature in details, please do subscribe to my channel English Literature with Sumi. And if you want to get the latest notifications to my channel, please hit the bell icon as well. Thank you.